Hi, welcome to Morning Talk Show. Today is a conversation with Paul VanderKlay. I've had Paul VanderKlay on the show before. He's a pastor and basically a philosophically minded, very open and curious person who makes YouTube videos, his own, where he works through ideas and comments on the videos of others, and then also interviews with people more well-known, such as John Vervaeke, who's one of my favorites, all the way to people like me and people who, even people who don't have podcasts or any kind of outlet of their own at all, who just want to talk to him. And he's a fascinating guy because he's extremely open and he's extremely practical and honest. And so he has in his orbit a lot of people, probably a lot of people who are watching this right now, who are all over the spectrum, from people who don't have any religious faith to people who are extremely conservative and orthodox to people who are extremely heretical and wild in their thinking. He talks to them all, and he seems to find something interesting in all of them. So it was fun to talk to him. I brought to him a question that I've had about kind of religious faith for a long time, probably for my whole life, which is basically, how do you believe in something like the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ? Even as a Christian, I don't really know how you express a positive belief in the resurrection of somebody. And so we get into that, and I enjoyed where the conversation went. The things he was saying kind of stimulated some thoughts in my own head that I was trying to work through, and he was trying to kind of help me. So it was interesting. I think it not that it necessarily answered the question perfectly, but it definitely was stimulating and thought-provoking for me. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe on YouTube or on the audio platform that you watch. Leave a review if you can. It helps me out. So thanks very much. Here's Paul VanderKlay. I'll just start. We've met each other before, so I'll just say, Paul VanderKlay, welcome again to Morning Talk Show.
We've done this twice before, right?
We've done this twice before, yeah. The one I was terrified to put out because of the Jordan Peterson element, and then the one I did put out. So
what's so scary about the Jordan Peterson element?
Ask Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan doesn't seem a bit afraid.
No, I know. All of that stuff is really interesting. I think now my fear about our first conversation would just be putting myself on display as someone who had basically never done a podcast before. So anyway, how has your day been so far?
It's been pretty good. I wrote my sermon. That was a lot of my day, plus all the other odds and ends that happen in a day for me. So,
do you write your sermon word for word?
No. I in the past, I've done manuscripts. Once, I work on things, and then when I I usually write it in PowerPoint, actually, sort of write an outline. And then tomorrow I'll kind of finish that up and then do a rough draft. And then Sunday morning, I'll go through it again before I preach it. And then I preach it. So
nice. Yeah. I can't imagine you writing out a manuscript, considering how much speaking you do to the camera on a daily basis. You're pretty used to expressing your ideas in a linear format without too many ums and ahs and all that kind of thing.
It's painful watching videos of myself, and I was watching the conversation I had with Vervaeke and Sam, and just like, oh, spit it out, man, spit it out. But I don't always know what to spit out, especially in a conversation like that where these guys, Sam is brilliant, and so is John, and they just make you think so hard. It's like, relax my mouth, wait for the thought, and then let it out.
Oh man, it's good to hear you say that, because I feel that way with pretty much all the interviews that I do, where I'm a verbal. I think I have ADD or something, because I can think a thought best when I can say it out loud, but that does mean you wander around. Yeah. And when I'm on my own and my thoughts are flowing, I'm speaking out loud, And those are like my Holy Spirit moments where I'm like, holy, I just said something, like, wow, I wish I had recorded that in a way so that I could look back on it later, because I'll never remember.
Yeah.
But you have so much documentation. I mean, you're great too. And obviously, I mean, that was a great conversation. And not Paul, you're Paul. John Vervaeke said, every time I talk to you, I love you more. And he really slowed down to say that too. Like he's he's such a he's so great for that kind of thing. So you pulled your weight.
He's tremendously generous. And he and I mean, I've got a whole playlist on my channel of all of our conversations. And so we've spoken a fair number of times. And when I watched the 4 Horsemen of Meaning video that Jordan did, you could really tell that John and Jonathan had spoken more together because it was easier for them to sync up. That's right. Part of the point of Dialogos, that it's in community that you can actually begin to dance well together.
So. Yeah, it's true. The reason I do the podcast is that I really like to talk to people I don't know, and getting the rhythm of talking to somebody you don't know is an interesting thing. Not saying it's always successful, but when it is, it feels really good too. But it's different than when you know somebody well. Yeah. So the reason I asked you on again was based on a Twitter interaction where I had said I'd ask you what your most controversial theological doctrine that you believe would be, and I didn't know which way you were going to go with that. This is not a theology podcast, but I've become increasingly interested. I've just kind of realized that my thoughts are theological thoughts, not in the sense of like I can't expound on chapter and verse and Greek and Hebrew or anything like that. But I kind of realized that based on the way that I'm experiencing reality and thinking about reality, they're theological thoughts because there are other entities present in my thoughts, if that makes any sense. That especially when they're going well, there's something else going on other than just my own intellect. So anyway, that's a whole other issue. But I was interested that, rather than one of those crazy things like apostatastis or whatever, that Satan and his angels will be redeemed or in the end or something like that, your most controversial theological doctrine was that the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ was the hope for mankind. I believe is how you phrased it.
Is the hope for mankind, not just was. Continues to be.
Did I say was? Is.
Yes, is.
Oh, sorry. Is the hope for mankind. And so that made me realize that I really haven't gotten into like we that kind of conversation on the podcast before. I've talked to people with more occult beliefs and that kind of thing, but I haven't actually talked to a Christian about how you come to that kind of belief. And it might be a question you can answer in 2 words, or it might be something you have more to say about. But I guess that's my first question. How do you believe in the physical resurrection of someone from the dead that happened, thousands of years ago?
Because my parents believed it.
All right. Well, nice chatting with you.
There it is. PVK believes because mommy and daddy said so. How uninteresting. But there's a deeper point under that, which is a point that I was trying to make a bit in the video that I did today, which is that, so Vervaeke has the relevance realization. And, when I talked to him first about that, I called it a black box, and he was very generous when I called it that, because that could have been interpreted as an insult. It's probably more like a Russian nesting doll, in that relevance realization is this basic move that we make where we select data, and because the world is too large and combinatorial explosiveness is real.
Love that one.
We choose this, and we do it often pre-consciously. We do it pre-rationally. We simply do it because we have to do it. Well, among other things, we are certainly have been conditioned to in this all of our lives. And that programming begins even before we emerge from our mother's womb, because we already begin to prefer our parents' voices to other voices. We know that. So that imprinting and the transmission of our relevance realization begins before birth. And the idea that the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ is historical, that's a very modern framework, is an audacious thing. Now, it's not an uncommon belief. You can find Christians, millions, billions of them perhaps around the world, who will testify and say, I believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead. It's right there in the Apostles' Creed. I believe in the resurrection of the dead, and that Jesus Christ was the first fruits of that resurrection. But it sounds like an absolutely crazy thing to believe, because we all know that dead people stay dead.
Yeah.
And human beings have known this for a very long time. N.T. Wright's book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, is outstanding on this. His chapter about the Greeks. There were the Greeks had all sorts of ideas about all kinds of things, but the one thing they were certain of is dead means dead. And that's a pretty difficult belief to falsify. It takes the Son of God to do so. But our belief in that, because of how human beings believe, is not that complicated if, for you, the conditions are appropriate. And for me, they were. My parents were honorable, trustworthy, good, reliable people, and they told me so, and I believed them, and I've believed them all my life. Now, having said that, there's a lot of question as to what this profession of mine really means, and how deeply that belief actually impacts the decisions I make in my life. That's a whole nother conversation. But when you ask me about, a belief that is just, it's the resurrection. It is basically, I think Christianity asserts that Christ's resurrection was the most real moment, perhaps second only to the incarnation, or perhaps incarnation is second only to the resurrection in recorded human history, because it is actually the birth of the renovation of heaven and earth. That's what Christianity puts on the resurrection. And you can find that in the letter to the Colossians, that the renewed creation begins in the resurrected flesh of Jesus Christ. That is an absolutely, that idea has been transforming the world ever since people began to realize it. And that word realize, I remember when I started to get my head around Vervaeke's relevance realization. Realization always has two sides. It has the upper register, kind of the mental realization, and the lower register, which is the actualization or the incarnation or the embodiment. And so relevance realization was a very crafty formula that he put together.
Yeah, to make real.
Right, to make real. And so the resurrection of Jesus, it changed the world, and it continues to change the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I love that you just immediately copped to the fact that your parents believing it was why you initially believed it, because, I feel like there's a lot of intellectual pride in people who want to feel that regardless of my conditioning, I still somehow forged myself out of stone, and I came to this on my own, I rejected my past. So that's amazing. And I guess the other thoughts that come up in my mind is that there are other things, like I have found that the big transformational things in my life or decisions were more realizations than they were decisions. And I don't know if this is a good or bad idea, but I told my wife that I realized I wanted to marry her. I didn't decide that I wanted to marry her. It wasn't a decision. I mean, I still had the decision ahead of me to whether or not to ask, but it was like, I had always thought you choose somebody, but it's like, no, we spent some time together, and then I realized. But I think the most kind of unusual one for me, which like I'll say as a way to frame how I'm thinking about all these things, is that I realized that I believed in evolution. And I talked about this with Tim Freak, because he's convinced that evolution. I'm not sure I believe this or not. It's a neat idea that he believes that evolution, if properly framed, can be the narrative that we need. And I don't know about that, but I did have, in my own thoughts on evolution, I was raised to believe that it was not only was it not true, it couldn't be true. And if it were true, it kind of undermined all of Scripture and Christianity. It was basically anti-Christian to believe in it. I was raised young earth creationist. And it was so interesting because I had to note in myself evolution, just personal evolution in myself. And maybe I'm just outing myself as being irrational here, but having seen the evolution of myself and the evolution of systems that I was maybe a part of, how even organizations evolve and slowly, and things kind of change, and there's these false starts and everything, and that it's such a long, gradual crawling process. It started to feel like that was actually in some way the nature of reality. And so I just kind of instead I had always thought, one day I'm going to sit down and figure out this evolution stuff. I'm going to actually have to read a bunch of science, which I'm not interested in. I mean, not intrinsically interested in, and figure this out. But then one day I just kind of realized, like, no, well, I've heard the science over the years. We were taught it in school, and now I just believe it because I've seen evolution in other ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I wonder what you mean by evolution. And
right. Sure.
And I don't know, and this is not an insult to you or saying anything. There's a way in which you could rightly ask me, I wonder what you mean by the resurrection of Jesus. And I don't know if you know what you mean, because these are, we're not even quite sure what they are. We can call them things, we can call them ideas, but I think they're way more than that. And again, we're not even quite sure what they are. So
they're more than calendar events too.
Yes, they are.
So
what would you, when you talk about a belief in evolution, because that's very different from, let's say, I trust my mother. That to me is a very real statement to say, I believe in democracy.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Like I know I'm terribly simplifying things, and even the other day someone talked about Christianity being true, and I was like, what could that even mean? Like, so yes, I've made a similar type of statement in there, and I guess I don't want to take too much time on evolution because I'm not passionate about it, but I do. I believe that the Earth is millions of billions of years old, and that there were and the species slowly and gradually evolved. Now, I guess I'm probably a heretic even in that way, because I'm all in with the Rupert Sheldrake. What is he? Now I can't think of the term. The morphic resonance and morphic fields, and I think there's a lot more behind evolution than dead process and all that. And I think, there's a whole discussion there that might not be germane, but yeah, I realize that saying I believe in evolution is very vague. But you did mention that you believe in the physical. Can't remember how you said it. You believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus, but to kind of unpack how that actually changes your life and how important the historical, almost filmable resurrection of Jesus would have been is a whole different question. So, I guess, how would you approach that question? Because I'm wondering if we are more similar than different, because the resurrection of Jesus, if I'm honest, is a very foundational thing for me as a person. And I guess when I did start watching Jordan Peterson long ago, I was comfortable at that time with it just literally being just entirely a literary device metaphor, a way to talk about a psychological phenomena. And I'm different than that now, in that there is a kind of a magical transformational element to it. But anyway, how would you unpack that? Like, where does the physical side of it fit into your belief?
Well, there's obviously the event nature of it. I could say my dog puked on the carpet, and that might mean that myself or my wife would have to go clean it up because we don't want dog puke on the carpet. So it's an event that happens in history, the significance of the event. And now let's say if actually my dog died a few months ago, but let's say if I was concerned, my wife and I were concerned about the health of our dog, and my wife went off to work early in the morning and I was at home with the dog and the dog puked on the carpet, I could text my wife, the dog puked on the carpet, and given whatever medical concerns we had about the dog puking on the carpet would have significance beyond just sort of this bare fact that the dog puked on the carpet.
Yeah.
Now, the resurrection of Jesus Christ obviously is a far more consequential and important event than a dog puking on a carpet. But I've see, this is where I got to slow my mouth down and say, okay, form your thought and then talk.
Well, you're not talking to John Vervaeke right now, so you don't need to be intimidated.
But it's not a matter of intimidation.
I know,
it's a matter of let's let the thought land and not have the mouth working while the thought is still hitting the ground. Keep your seatbelt on until we've landed on the runway. That's what I have to teach my lips.
Fair enough.
I'm just failing it right now as I explain. There's a lot of debate about, did he walk out of that tomb or didn't he? And actually, we don't even in the Gospels have a record. We have a stone rolled away, and we have an empty tomb.
Yeah.
The assumption, of course, is that he walked out. What does that mean? I've had people say to me things like, well, if he did, weird things happen. I once had a conversation with a former colleague of Jordan Peterson that, before Peterson's fame, was at a conference with him, and they were roommates for that conference, and they were staying in a haunted hotel. Jordan Peterson actually tells the story on a podcast, I don't remember the name of it, of what happened in that haunted hotel, that there was a ghost in that hotel that tended to like to open the drawers. And when Jordan and his colleague came back to the room after going out for dinner, the drawers were all open. And they had very good reason to believe that the hotel staff didn't do it. I mean, the drawers opened in the hotel, that the drawers were substantial enough. It wasn't a truck going by that slowly jiggles the doors. The ghost opened the drawers in the hotel. And I was talking to this colleague, and he and I had been talking about some of the general things about atheism and materialism and all of that. And so, in the conversation, he had said that he was Jordan's roommate, and that story was completely true. He was a second witness to it. In other words, Jordan Peterson didn't hallucinate that the drawers were open. What a thing to hallucinate, but hallucinations are kind of crazy anyway. So then I asked him, I said, well, how do you account for the drawers opening in the hotel room? Weird things happen, which is no explanation at all,
Right.
except that weird things happen.
Yeah.
And so people will say to me, basically along the same lines, well, Jesus' resurrection, okay, even if it did happen, so what? Grandma is still lying in her grave on that grassy hillside in the cemetery where we left her. So you get into the significance question. But the Bible doesn't just leave us with weird things happen. The Bible says to us that we will participate in his resurrection, because that weird thing that happened at that tomb outside Jerusalem happened within a historical context where meaning is attached. So again, today's video, I just did a little bit of talking about the fact that part of what meaning is among us is the connection of two things. So Northrop Frye looks at the biblical storytelling and pays attention to the fact that the Bible, especially in the book of Revelation, says Sodom is Egypt, is Babylon, is Rome. And it's like, well, they're not even the same categories. Egypt is big, and Sodom is a town, and Babylon and Rome are cities. What do you mean by that? It connects things. And the truth is, all of the connection between our upper mental register and the lower physical, both sides of realization, depend on these kinds of connections. And relevance realization, in many ways, is in fact this kind of connection drawing, which again means that from the time before I was born, my parents have been knitting these things into me, drawing these connections. So this thing that happens, which apologists love to fight over, because what happened in the modern period is that the dominant question we brought to the Bible was, did it happen? And what we mean by that is, did molecules in flesh and air move in the ways described by the narrative in that story? The Bible has a much bigger story in which this resurrection of Jesus is connected to us. And not just connected, say, to my body. I remember in The Walking Dead, there was Herschel early on in The Walking Dead, who was a believer. He had a couple of daughters, and one of his daughters has gone on to be one of the main characters who's endured in that story. But Herschel made a comment in one of the early episodes that, I read about the resurrection and I didn't think it would look like this. Well, fair enough, because the story doesn't say we will pop out of the ground and, want to chomp on human flesh mindlessly. That what comes out of our graves will somehow be analogous to what came out of Jesus' tomb. Now, if I can somehow incorporate that tiny little story, and it's in many ways it's a wispy story. N.T. Wright makes the comment that one of the most remarkable things about the canonical accounts of the resurrection is that they are not embroidered. And what he means by that is that in storytelling, especially about someone who is your hero or master like Jesus, there's always the tendency to embroider it. And what embroidery means, you take a bunch of the finery of the meaning and weave it into the story. And what you get from the resurrection accounts certainly is mythological, in that it is woven into the the fabric of the story of the Bible, but it is not embroidered. It almost has the sense of the people who were eyewitnesses to it. And the Bible is very clear about that point. It was the people. Paul of Tarsus in 1 Corinthians 15 notes, if I'm going to believe this thing, I should be able to go to Jerusalem and find people that will testify, I saw him before and I saw him after. I also saw him crucified. So that's pretty hard stuff. And, ancients weren't dumb. And so Paul's like, I had to go to Jerusalem and I had to talk to people who would tell me this. And these had to be credible witnesses. And even then they had an understanding of what would make a non-credible witness. They had to be credible witnesses. And I needed to have that level of belief. But that's only the beginning, because then the question is, can I incorporate that little piece of data into the rest of the story and the imprint that has become me from before I was born? Because everything that we've always known about dead people gets reinforced every time we travel to that seminary and put a loved one who's in a box in the ground.
Cemetery, not seminary.
Right, cemetery. So that's why, because if that story is true, and if that connection is true, and if the kinds of things that Jesus said about the story and the connection were true, and the kinds of things that the apostles taught about that story and the connection are true, that should radically impact my life. Now, let's imagine that I have a ticket on an airline and I'm going to fly out of Sacramento on Southwest flight, blah, 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 blah. And someone says, there's going to be something's going to happen to that airplane and it's going to fall out of the sky. But at that moment, you will discover your superpower of flight and super strength, and you will save the aircraft. I'd be a little skeptical.
Yeah.
I'd probably say, I kind of believe that maybe there's going to be an accident or something. So I'm not going to get on the flight. I'm going to stay home. I'm going to take a train. I'm going to drive. I'm not getting on that plane.
Well, if you have faith that the fact in it crashing, then the other part would be irrelevant. Well, yeah. No, I think I see what you mean.
So this is where the resurrection gets, because Jesus is saying, now, Paul, you PVK, I'm going to raise you from the dead. And you're going to reign with me in a new heavens and a new earth. How will that change my life now?
Right.
Oh, because it's almost as difficult to believe as that I'm going to have superpower and super strength and I'm going to save everybody on that airplane. And I would much rather just not get on.
In other words, the significance of the resurrection is almost as big of a hurdle to believe as the physical resurrection itself,
if not more.
And you're kind of creating a balance that says the physical and the meaning side, the relevance, are both kind of broad and very broad implications, like huge implications for us individually as people. And I think that's really interesting, because I'm somebody for whom the implications this is good. The implications of the resurrection have always seemed a lot more under my power if that makes any sense. They've always seemed like something I could access. Like, okay, I can't access the physical resurrection. I'm not antithetical to, I'm not opposed to it. I'm not offended by it, but I can't access it. But I think my, what I'm realizing is that my fallacy is probably thinking that the implications, in thinking that the implications of the resurrection were something attainable to me, I was equally devaluing the significance. Because I'm hi Delia, I'm talking to Paul. Do you want to say hi to Paul?
Oh,
Okay, sorry.
cat.
Yeah, no, it's my daughter. She.
Oh, your daughter, even better.
Yeah, just say hi. Just pop up. No, okay, she doesn't want to pop up. Do you need something? Anyway, doesn't matter. This is her hangout spot sometimes when I'm working from home. Anyway, oh, you're getting your robe. Okay, love you. Go see mom. There she is.
Hey, sweetheart.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right, but yeah, my no, this is I tell me if I'm sounding silly on this, but I guess I'm now seeing this as I'm situated in sort of the middle of a continuum, or a continuum may not be the right. I am the balance point between two things. On one side, we have a wild claim that a human being rose from the dead. On the other side, we have the possibility that I am a joint heir with Jesus Christ, and I'm the balance point, and both of those things are wild, just crazy. And so while that doesn't make me believe in the physical resurrection at this moment in any greater way, it does make me realize that I need to be careful on how I orient myself along that continuum, because I cannot say that I'm all the way over on this side, because that would imply that in some ideological way that I can attain the salvation that I seek, which I guess is divorced from heaven and hell right now for me, just on a personal level. But the salvation that I seek, I can't necessarily skip this and grab this. Do you know what I mean? I'm just kind of interpreting what you're saying.
Well, I think that's right. And that gets into all kinds of crazy things like attain. That's not an unfair word. It's the word that the Apostle Paul uses. But there's something about this that is not in your power. But yet you're not exactly sure, because you do have power in this.
Right.
And, it's obvious. This is obviously an aspect that, Calvinism and Calvinists have sort of run around the table around.
Yeah.
But to the defense of Calvinism, there's nothing you can do to with your strength effectuate that your participation in that story, because maybe you're surrounded by your family at a ripe old age and say, okay, I'm going through now once I'm going to try real hard and I'm going to resurrect myself. No. I've seen some pretty strong, stubborn people die. And you know what? They always die.
Yeah.
A guy recently was 99 years old. Boy, that guy was tough as nails. When he was 97, a guy tried to rob him, and he hit the guy. He's a 97-year-old on his front lawn. He was not going to back down. That dude was tough as nails. He had been a soldier. He was born right after the First World War. He had been in the army for the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. And I mean, this is as tough as they come. And you know what? Death took him.
Yeah.
At 99, he almost made 100.
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at that. You're just describing it in a very amusing way. Yeah. I know this is interesting. This is sparking thoughts in my head, which is where my thoughts usually happen.
It's a good place for them.
Yeah. But another, okay, I had another thought and I just want to kind of try to get back to it. We're talking, get it to land on the runway. Um, and I guess it was just regarding, I mean, because there's no denying for me and for many people that the resurrection of Jesus is is a theme in life. It's something that comes up, and I know that. I mean, I was raised by a pastor as well, and so it's not something that I chose, but it has surprisingly remained relevant even as I feel like my faith exploded and was laying in pieces on the floor. It's just sort of, it's always been there. And a question that comes to mind is what, if there was only going to be one person to transcend death and rise from the dead, and it was Jesus at that time, what would be a good reason for that to have happened? It's an interesting thought pattern to go down. Like, no, it doesn't happen. We've never seen it happen. But in this context, if it happened this one time, is there some kind of strange coherence to it happening one time and to one person? And I'm not necessarily asking you that to answer that question. I'm just saying that's kind of, and I think I don't know if you've read Mark Vernon's The Secret History of Christianity. Yeah. Owen Barfield. Yep. Hey, nice.
We spoke about it on my channel.
Yes, of course. Yes, I knew you did. I knew you did because I talked to Mark Vernon, and then I was so excited to see other people talking to him. But yeah, that one is a really great book that I recommend. Like, if anybody happens to be watching this podcast and wanting to think about the Christ situated in history, that's a really good one, because it my takeaway was that that Christ actually arrived on the physical scene right at the tipping point of the collective participation versus individual participation axial moment, like really the knife edge. And you could say that the story of Christ is what caused the tip, or you could say that everything up to that point was leading to it. That's more where my thinking goes, and that's where the book goes, where we weren't even, like, we were developing slowly the capacity to think of ourselves as always as an independent individual, kind of, and then Christ came and gave a template for how to my take on it is that Christ showed us actually how to avoid the pitfalls of that, rather than being like, we became righteous individuals with Christ. Like when Jesus died, and the whole story of Jesus helped us to harness this superpower of being an individual. It's almost like, hey, here's how you don't fuck it up. Sorry.
Yeah, we do every day.
Yeah, we do every day, right? Of course, it's it's an aspirational thing we are trying to, and that is, I guess that does speak to why it only happened. This new life after death only happened once, because Christ had a quality that we don't have to do it, but we have to keep trying to do it. We have to keep trying to do it over and over again, and it speaks to what even life could mean. Like, for me, in the story of Jesus, even the word life, even the fact that he rose again from the dead, the word, him being alive after that, is a spiritual alive. I mean, I guess for Christ, there may have been continuity throughout, but for us, if we're going to imitate that death and resurrection, the life on the other side of that resurrection is a different kind of life, if that makes sense. It's not like you tripped, you fell down, you stood up again, and you kept walking. It's like,
right.
It's a new kind of life where you are now somehow. Yeah, I don't know. Go start talking.
Not a problem.
You're making me think. I had more
That's
I had
good.
more coherently prepared things I thought I might say, but
No,
anyway.
that's what dialogos and conversation is for.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
little journeys and we don't know where they'll go. And that's what makes them fun and exciting. I guess the first thing is that C.S. Lewis quite nicely says in his book Miracles that people imagine what we talk about when we talk about the resurrection is the first 5 minutes after, Easter sunrise on that first Easter. And Lewis is quite right when he says that's not really it, because Lazarus came out of the grave.
Yeah.
We have Elijah and Elisha and Jesus effecting resurrections. But part of the poverty of our language is that we're using the same word for two very different things, if we might call them that.
Yeah.
Because even though it is very clear that the story of Christ's resurrection leverages a mythical, cyclical story that sometimes we sort of map onto a hero's journey or something like that. And Jordan Peterson will often appropriate it like that. And C.S. Lewis goes into the fact that many other cultures had similar stories and were doing that. And Jesus actually uses a similar story once, which is really rather remarkable. And the fact that Jesus happens among the Jews is another interesting aspect to that story. If the wisdom of the Jews and many other cultures to this point could very easily be leveraged against the example of Jesus' life. And that wisdom would be, hey, Aaron, you have a lovely daughter. I'm sure you have a lovely wife. You've got a job. You've got musical instruments and probably some talent. You've got a good mind that you can read books and explore ideas. What's the best life you can live? Well, the best life you can live is probably continue on the track of your family and your daughter and, hopefully some grandchildren at some point, and some success in work and some success in love and some success in fatherhood, and, trips with the grandchildren, and maybe even live long enough to see your great grandchildren. And then at some point when your physical body is exhausted, you will be laid to rest, surrounded by loving family and friends. That's a good life. It's a very good life. And, if you watch It's a Wonderful Life, it's in fact a wonderful life. And this earth affords that. But that is not Jesus' story. It's perhaps, to a degree, the skepticism that Jesus was married, and actually I'm going to wander into that in my sermon on Sunday, a little teaser. In many ways, the argument that, and it's made by this book, The Last Temptation of Christ, well, wouldn't it have been better for Jesus to live a normal life? And what we mean by normal is love, family, success, all of those things that the patriarchs had. And that Job had, that lost and regained. And Jesus is a strange example because his life does not look like a patriarch's life at all. So, and so when I talk to Jacob, who's on the Discord server, who's not just Jewish by ethnicity, but Jewish by belief, he'll I love talking with him about this stuff, because I like people who tell me what they really think, and they don't, well, I don't dare say this to a pastor. I might hurt his feelings. Come on, give me a break. Don't treat me like an infant. He'll say, this whole, if the resurrection would have meant anything, Jesus should not have ascended. Because he should have come out of the tomb, said to Pilate and Herod and the Roman soldiers and the hierarchy in Jerusalem. How do you like me now? I'm going back to Galilee. I'm going to find a young hottie and settle down and have lots of kids and a big farm. And, you know, if you come by me, I'm going to start a storm. I'm going to smite your soldiers and you're going to be done. And I'm going to live my best life now, and everybody's going to watch it.
Right.
And then they're going to lay me to rest in a nice tomb on a hill in Galilee.
Right.
That's not the story.
Right. Yeah.
So what is the story? And what does that story then mean? And that doesn't take anything away from sort of the good life of the patriarchs.
Of course. Yeah. I don't know if you're just winding up there. I have a thought. Am I interrupting you?
No, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. I interviewed Howard Bloom, who is a outspoken atheist. He's written books about atheism and that kind of thing. And we talked about, so I'm honing in on the idea that you're talking about, that basically, by human standards, Jesus did not live a successful life. He was not a success. Which
not
is
in any way we would like to be successful.
Right. Which was kind of, I mean, and even Howard was saying he was unsuccessful in his predictions for things. And so, but in the course of the conversation, we also talked about human luminaries who were successful people. And I really wish I could remember who we mentioned, because it was basically like scientific originators of ideas, people like Darwin, or I think Darwin may have been one of them.
He didn't have a very happy life.
Well, yeah, but we're talking, I guess I'm more thinking about the perception of success and the basically the creation of disciples for himself, which a lot of scientific thinkers have done. They've had disciples in schools and institutes build up around them, and ideologies even within science build up around them, to the point that when other data seems to come into play that undermines, rather than like the scientific ideal of celebrating this and, wow, well, let's dissolve our institution in joy and frolic in this new, revelation. It's more like there's entrenchment, and there's people who try to force those ideas to stay around. And it struck me in the course of that conversation that Jesus, in a weird way, is an antidote to that kind of thinking. And like, I'm not afraid to say this to offend you as a pastor, but it almost feels to me like Jesus was saying, don't worship me, emulate me, be like this, get to, Christ, who being in very nature,
be a disciple.
Yeah, Christ, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but instead took on the nature of a servant. I don't know if that's the exact quote, but it's and so that in a way, yeah, it was almost a rejection of earthly success, subsumed to the greater will and the greater good became the ideal. And if we worship Jesus, it's only because Jesus did this thing that we all need to do, and then left the Holy Spirit behind in order that we can all interface with Jesus and with this rejection of supremacy and primacy. I don't know. I mean, it's very tricky, because in this kind of canonical, or this prototypical rejection of supremacy, he became absolutely supreme, and we're still talking about him 2,000 years later. So I don't know. That was a little rant, but do you have a response?
Well, it's full of those ironies. You can boil it down to, let's say, Frodo and Sam in The Lord of the Rings. Sam, the Shire. See, this is where I gotta tell my mouth to relax while my head forms the full sentence. Frodo saves the Shire for Sam. And in many ways, the journey of the hobbits, while Aragorn wants to save Gondor and Gandalf wants to save all of Middle Earth from
Everything.
Sauron, Frodo wants to save the Shire for Sam. But Frodo never fully is rewarded with the Shire the way Sam is, because Sam comes back, marries the girl at the bar, has a bunch of little hobbits, and they live happily ever after. And so I did a conversation with Dr. Jim recently on my channel about story. And we talked about this because generally in the hero's journey, what the hero's journey yields is a productive, blessed outcome where you have usually the manifestations or the mythical manifestations of productivity, which usually involve a man, a woman with the potential of children and a family and that. And so there's something deeply built into the story. And in the Christian story, when you get to the book of Revelation and the end of it, you have that in the new heavens and the new earth and the new Jerusalem. It's not necessarily mythologized as a romantic couple with the potentiality of having children, but it's a whole new world that comes about. But the question that Jesus challenges us with, and this is a long conversation within Christianity that gets into Protestant versus Catholic, monastery versus the nuclear family, all of these kinds of tensions. In that, so you're going to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Which kind of disciple will you be? Will you be a monk? So Martin Luther was going to be a lawyer until he has this scary ride through the woods and I don't know if you've ever been in the woods in a close thunderstorm, but it's pretty terrifying. He falls on the forest floor and cries out to Saint Anne, "Save me, I'll become a monk," because he was worried about his immortal soul. So he goes into a monastery. Now he, of course, will become the revolutionary that destroys monasticism and exchanges it for the nuclear family. But the monastery and the nuclear family are actually both sort of also pointing to this generative future. And there's kind of two tracks. And of course, Protestants and Catholics sort of vie. And I think Catholic doctrine of the family is maybe an attempt to maybe gain ground from some of the Protestants. And I don't know.
Yeah. There's layers.
But this question of basically what Jesus says is, if you live like me, you will die like me, and you will be raised with me. That's in a sense the gospel story in a very tight little nut. But right away, when we hear that story, we think, what does it mean for me to live like him? Does that look like a monastery? Does it look like the nuclear family? Does it look like what does that look like? Because even though, for a while, everyone was running around with these rubber wristbands that said, what would Jesus do on it? The question is not so easily answered, given the fact that we are not Palestinian fisher. We are not Galilean fishermen.
Right. Yeah.
And even when you boil down to the story of the apostles, well, were they successful? On one hand, dramatically so, because no one changed the world like Jesus Christ and continues to do so. At the same time, they didn't look like, the lifestyle of the patriarchs. So these are all hard questions.
Yeah. And it's so personal, and it needs to be so embodied when you realize rather than decide, as we said earlier, you kind of realize. It's almost like you have a moment where you think, what would I release control over my death for? For what would I release my primacy? For what would I relinquish respect of human beings? And while still loving them, of course, Because there are people who I think feel they've given themselves over. I mean, they're insufferable, and it's one of the reasons Christianity is so difficult. They've given themselves over to righteousness, and they think they've forsaken all of this world. But they're not. If you're not loving people as well, and another thing that came to mind. Man, you got me ranting here, but uh, something that seems true to me is that one of the defining characteristics of Jesus on earth was that he was present to the people and in the moments where he was. And there's countless examples of him doing something that wasn't part of his, schedule for the day, or schedule for life. He basically had one end that he had to get to, that he knew he had to get to at the end. But for the other things, it's like, well, this wasn't on the schedule. But when he saw people's pain, he wept. When he was face to face with someone, he healed. And I think that's kind of, I see it as a rejection of a sort of templated ministry, or a templated ideological way to live your life. It's almost like being like Christ is specifically always rejecting the template in favor of whatsoever thy hand findeth to do. Or I don't know if this is like you're nodding, so I guess I'm not sounding completely stupid.
No,
but,
not at all.
Yeah.
There's a strangeness to this, because with everything that we've just said about the strange shape of Jesus' life and monastery versus nuclear family or something like that, one might get the impression, rightly so, from what Jesus has to say in many occasions, that the path of discipleship is hard and strenuous and requires our absolute focus, concentration, and sacrificial rigor. There's nothing you will read in the Gospels or in the New Testament that doesn't give us that lesson. But then you have at the same time the other thief on the cross. And they both start out, dunking on Jesus. And then, in one gospel, one of them pauses and says, hey, wait a minute, you and I, we know what we did. It's not playing games here. The guy in the middle, we all know his reputation too. He didn't collect a cache of arms. He didn't knife Roman soldiers or Jewish collaborators with Rome in the street. He healed, he blessed, he preached, and here he is by us. And then he says, remember me when you come into your kingdom.
And Jesus says, sure, okay.
Surely today you'll be with me in paradise. And it's like, what happened to all of the rigorous discipleship we were just talking about? But
right,
this Christianity is that thing. It stretches from the assertion that the most determined Christian, the most determined cruciform, self-sacrificial Christian cannot by their efforts attain this. All of their efforts will be insignificant to achieve it. Yet this schlub who's lived a horrible life, in no way connected with discipleship, and in a moment of true faith receives what the other would. That's what do we do with that?
It's this it's the sort of terribly somber realization that maybe we have the privilege of purposeful suffering for Christ, and that's actually the reward. Which is only can I say that after being a parent for 9 years and having it ground into my head that the most horrible suffering of my life has been the most redemptive and impactful thing that I could have done. And I'm not saying people have to become parents. I'm not saying they have to become monasteries or priests, but I guess that is the thing that unites the monastery and the nuclear family, is that everyone who in there who takes it upon themselves to really be present there is taking on a suffering for the sake of others and for the sake of God, and that turns out to be the reward.
Yeah. Well, not all the reward, we hope, but there certainly is reward in it.
Sure.
Because,
I mean, in this life, that's the reward. I guess maybe that's the reward that we can see, or I don't know how to. Yeah. Even as I start to talk, I'm saying I should shut up. But go ahead.
No, that's right. That's right. And the monk who has spent their life in renunciation, they've not pursued romance. They've not pursued business ventures. They've not pursued establishing an estate. We would hope that the monk's life well lived would mean that the monk would at the end say, I'm glad I did it this way. It sure cost me a lot, but
yeah,
this was, looking around at his brothers or her sisters in the monastery, would say, no, I'm here with you all, and we will be together again soon. And the same that the father or the mother with the children and grandchildren huddled around say that, wow, yeah, because to be a parent is to suffer. And it's that way, again, back to sort of the mythical aspect of this, that, yeah, this pattern of cruciform suffering on behalf of the other. This, of course, is, the Peugeot's big point. This path of cruciform suffering that we find in the gospel plays itself out. Every successful parent brings a child into development and adulthood at the expense of their own life, maybe in tiny little increments in terms of attention and all of the money and all of the time and all of the blood, sweat, and tears. It is sacrificial, sometimes substitutionary suffering that brings life into this world. And that pattern is certainly right there in the gospel. And Jesus goes to the extreme of it by basically saying, it is my cruciform life that in fact regenerates all of the cosmos. Wow.
Well,
that is the claim.
We just came through Epiphany, and this is my first year as an Anglican. I guess I'm an Anglican now. I don't know, but this is my first year being involved in services and things in an Anglican context. So this is kind of my first Epiphany, and maybe I've got it wrong, but the Epiphany to me is almost like the center of the infinity sign, where on one side is death and on one side is birth, and there's this weird balance. Like Christ was, well, let's see if I can express this, man. Christ was always moving towards, so it's almost like I'm going to compare it to giving birth. A woman becomes pregnant, and in that moment she is now on the path to this terrible, painful thing that is also a birth. And it's now, I mean, it's one of the things we do. We commit to things, and they are, if we stay in them, they lead invariably to the end, where I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, except that the birth of Christ and the death of Christ seem to be this very connected, cyclical thing. And so if we can somehow die like Christ, which is a very complicated idea anyway, we are born like Christ. I'm petering out there, but Do you have any responses?
Well, they are part of what's difficult to sort of mark some of these things is that so you have the incarnation, the birth, you have the crucifixion, you have the resurrection, you have the ascension, you have the final judgment. I mean, the whole thing just sort of, you're right in that you can sort of collapse it and have it be real small, or you can pull it out and have it be real big, but the things do connect. And there is a way in which our lives are similar too. I mean, we come into this world helpless, and if we live long enough, they slap a diaper on us when we come in the door, and they're slapping diapers on us as we're ready to head out. The not terribly lovely truth about us, but there we are.
Yeah.
But now, in terms of, let's say, if you view life through a Christian lens, of course, that new diaperhood that comes at the end is also going to be the door to a new beginning. And that's part of the problem with the materialist story, is that your book ended with diapers. That's it.
Yeah.
You got a big bang at the front end, and you've got the cold death of the universe at the back end.
Right.
Oh, okay. That doesn't even really work.
Linear.
Yeah.
Very linear. Yeah. No. And heaven, I mean, you want to talk about having a hard time with the belief in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. Heaven and hell is one that I'm not even close to as far down the road with as believing in the physical resurrection. But I know what you mean, because I talk about this with a friend, that the materialist, you begin to find that the materialist way of looking at things with dead matter, everything is just dead matter. It's not useful in life for many different reasons, which I won't go into all here, but it's not useful in life. But then you realize, oh my goodness, the implications of not believing that are pretty weird and pretty big. Like, how, I don't know if this is making sense. It's like, without believing in any spiritual powers, without believing in God or Jesus as anything more than human beings, if you start to make that turn where there is life outside of the physical processes, then it's a Pandora's box that I don't know. Maybe one day heaven will be real to me too. I don't know, because I can't go back to rejecting anything other than physical processes. That it doesn't work. I mean, maybe I will, but never say never. But I can't imagine it. And yet it is a Pandora's box, and all these things, all of these spiritual beliefs are in the box somewhere, whether we get to them or not.
Well, the problem with a lot of conceptualizations that have been pretty prevalent in some corners of the church has been sort of this fixation on heaven and hell. And part of the problem with that is heaven and hell are basically sort of geography. And the main story is, now I'm going to sound utterly, those listening from my own tradition are going to sort of gasp, because I'm going to sound utterly traditional: creation, fall, redemption, restoration. That's the story in this direction. And heaven and hell are basically a horizontal geography, because at the end of the story you get new heavens and new earth. So it's the renovation of all things. And hell, which has been, which especially in Western European Christianity became a tremendous preoccupation in terms of hell avoidance. Now, I say all of this not to be skeptical about hell. I am not a universalist. Hell is partly, hell is a lot of different things, but it is the story of Christ is finally about our participation with him in the renovation of all things. Now, there are going to be those who do not want to be involved. And at that point, God says, your will be done. I mean, that's sort of Lewis's take, that
Right.
this is a party which is coming, and what God will not allow to happen is for some to spoil the party for others. There's a whole lot of spoilage going on right now in this world. In any neighborhood, in any family, in any situation, there's always someone who's spoiling something for someone else. And at that point, God says, no, my wedding must be full, and the party will commence, and there will be no party poopers. Now, that's the story. What gripped much of Western Europe was hell avoidance, which, yeah, there's lots of things that are important to avoid. But when hell avoidance becomes the preoccupation of the gospel, well, that's sort of like dressing for a wedding and, being terribly anxious about missing it. Well, okay, you should be a little anxious about missing it. Keep track of the time, get ready for it. But the point isn't missing the wedding. The point is the wedding.
Right. Yeah. It is tricky, because I get you. And I just read The Last Battle. So I haven't actually read Lewis talking about heaven and hell. I've read The Great Divorce, and I've read The Last Battle, which I think in a narrative sense are the ways that he addressed it, but I'm sure he addressed it in other ways too. But and he has a whole bunch of different reactions to heaven, like the some of the creatures who don't like the face of Aslan go into a shadow and nobody sees them again. He doesn't specify, but it kind of, yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing for me. I wasn't planning to get into hell, but my sense is that the reality of God is that our barriers against God are holding us back from something wonderful. It's holding us back from seeing the coherence and the beauty of reality and that God has made. And it's hard for me to imagine if that were revealed to you. It's hard for me to imagine the same having the same reaction as you had when you were blind. When you couldn't see it, when you had barriers to seeing it. It's like if an incel were to who's just bitter against women and hasn't seen one, hasn't touched one, were to experience the genuine love of a woman. It's hard to imagine. I mean, they could be so far gone in this case, because in that example, we're still talking about human beings, and human beings can just get destroyed. Human beings, our perceptions of the world can get so off and so damaged that you can't see the people in front of you, which gets back to Jesus being present with everybody. But it's hard to imagine that at the end of days, that sight wouldn't be restored. You know what I mean? That God wouldn't restore the sight of those people, so that they could actually see. Maybe they see people like trees walking when they're on Earth, right? If you remember the the blind man. But there's two types of sight given. And if you get that second sight where you're really seeing things the way they are, could you reject it? I don't know. Anyway, this is I'm sure I'll talk with Nate Heil about this and Jedediah.
Well, these are very hard questions.
Yeah. Anyway,
the question of evil is a difficult thing.
Yeah.
Because in many ways, Christianity frames the goodness so strongly that why would you not want this? But yet, the story of us is that we choose it.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of mystery there.
But yeah. I mean, just as I couldn't choose salvation. I couldn't claim that I chose any kind of salvation with all the available data. Anyway, it's interesting that we give people so much agency in the choice to reject salvation. And that implies to me that we have such great agency in the choice to receive salvation. And for this is the most Christian conversation I've ever had on this podcast. So if anybody is shaking their head,
they probably would have clicked off by now.
Yeah, exactly. It's ADHD YouTube territory, and they've unsubscribed. But anyway, we'll risk it. But yeah, I don't know. This is great stuff, though. I just feel like I could talk. I feel like I could talk about it all day long. But suffice it to say, I think there's been some good, really, really interesting points made. I mean, regarding the resurrection of Christ. I feel like there is a mysterious, to put it in Christian language, it's only through grace that we could even have a desire to address the issue with seriousness. And it's maybe that addressing the issue with seriousness and with as much of ourself as we can manage, that is, I don't know. That is now feeling to me like the realization that we should be grateful for. I mean, because there are many people on this earth who, and I'm not making a qualitative statement that they're not as good as me or as smart as you or as smart as me at all, but there is a certain element of like, you either intrinsically or internally want to engage with this issue, or you don't. And if you do, it's the wrestling with it. It's like the opponent processing thing where the resistance that it causes in your life forces you to engage with something, or is the way that you engage. I don't know, man. I'm on the edge here, but that's kind of where my mind and heart are at after hearing what you said. It's like I realize that if you focus on the physical resurrection, which honestly hasn't been something I've been like dying over, but it's if you focus on that as the impossible thing that needs to be overcome, you might forget that the actual life of faith and the imitation of Jesus is another impossible thing. In other words, I can't give myself the credit for doing the one or the other. And that both of those things just keep me on this continuum of some kind of tension that is productive.
Sounds good.
Which is going to be meaningless to people who aren't on that, who aren't there or aren't wanting to be on that continuum. But yeah, anyway,
I don't know if it'll be. Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
I'm sure you'll find out in the comments.
Yes, please leave comments. Anyway, yeah, this hopefully this one will generate some comments, because most of my comments are like, great conversation. And then I see comments on your videos, and then, your Twitter is so active and your little corner of the internet is so interactive that I'm kind of craving that. So people do leave comments. Anyway, yeah. I hate to go out on me giving a rant. Do you have anything you want to add?
I rant all the time. I've got so much ranting on the internet. It's not funny. I don't necessarily have to do it on your channel. I got my own channel to rant on.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, you don't need this platform. But anyway, yeah, I really appreciate this. This has been fascinating. I hope it translates to other people, because it is like, as I attempt this Dialogos thing, I find myself processing in front of this camera. So for good or for ill,
I understand
I
that.
really, I do appreciate the opportunity, and for your generosity of being here with me.
Well, I thought it was a great conversation, and I look forward to seeing what comes of it. So, yeah, we'll see.
Thank you. Likewise.